Stepping out of the arrival gate with the stale scent of the plane still clinging to my coat, I saw my ex-husband hugging his secretary like she was a shiny new trophy. He looked up, locked eyes with me, and his face collapsed as if someone had pulled his plug. He dropped to the floor, unconscious. I did not return after 6 months to cry over him. I came back to audit the books and close the final ledger. My name is Harper Quinn, and at 34 years old, I thought I had learned to anticipate every variable in a risk assessment model, but nothing prepared me for the sight waiting for me at the gate. I had just touched down at Silverline Airport in Baycrest, ending a self-imposed exile that had lasted 6 months. The air in the terminal was stale, recycled, and freezing, but the cold I felt had nothing to do with the temperature. I adjusted my grip on my suitcase handle, my thumb hovering over my phone screen to text a car service, when the crowd parted. Standing directly beneath the illuminated arrivals board was Graham Vance, my ex-husband. He was not waiting for a client. He was wrapped tightly around his executive secretary, Tessa Rowan. It was an embrace that went far beyond professional courtesy. Graham had his hand splayed low on the small of her back, the heavy, possessive grip of a man claiming territory he believed he owned outright. But it was not the intimacy that triggered the alarm bells in my head. It was the flash of metal on Tessa's wrist. She was wearing the vintage chronograph watch I had bought for Graham for our 5th anniversary, a watch he swore he had lost during the divorce proceedings. I stood completely motionless for 2 seconds. I did not feel the sting of betrayal or the ache of lost love. Those emotions were luxuries I could not afford. Instead, the compliance officer in my brain flipped a switch. I was looking at a data point. This public display was reckless, which meant it was not an affair. It was the visible tip of a hidden operational structure. Graham lifted his head. His eyes swept the crowd and then locked onto mine. The reaction was visceral. The blood drained from his face so instantly it looked as if someone had severed his main artery. His pupils dilated and his mouth opened and closed like a fish on dry land. Harper. No, it can't. His voice was a dry rasp. He took a stumbling step back, his hand slipping from Tessa's waist. Then, his eyes rolled back in his head. Graham Vance. The man whose ego was usually large enough to fill a boardroom, crumpled. He hit the linoleum floor with a heavy, dead weight, completely unconscious. Oh my God, someone help him. I think he is. Having a heart attack, a woman nearby screamed. Chaos erupted. Uniformed airline staff began sprinting toward us. Tessa let out a shrill cry and dropped to her knees. But her reaction was wrong. As she hovered over Graham, her hands fluttered uselessly, and her eyes did not stay on his face. Instead, her gaze darted sharply toward me, fixing specifically on my suitcase with a look of terrified desperation. She was not worried about his health. She was searching for something she thought I was carrying. I did not rush forward to administer CPR. I did not offer comfort. I simply took 2 steps closer to where Graham lay sprawled. A small slip of paper had fluttered out of his suit pocket when he fell. I crouched down in a fluid motion, shielding the action with my coat, and snatched the paper off the floor. It was a valet parking stub. Printed clearly at the bottom was the license plate number for a silver luxury sedan, a vehicle that was listed as sold and liquidated in our final settlement agreement 1 year ago. My phone buzzed against my hip. I pulled it out, glancing at the screen. The sender ID was blocked. Don't touch him. Cameras waiting. Garage level 4. I looked up. People were crowding around Graham, blocking him from view. I slid the parking ticket into my pocket and straightened my blazer. I turned my back on the commotion and began walking steadily toward the exit doors, the wheels of my suitcase humming against the floor. A very small, very cold smile touched my lips. Graham had fainted because he saw me. I was wide awake because, for the first time in a year, I was finally looking at the real books. I canceled the car service I had originally booked to my mother's house. Going there now would only put a target on her back, and I needed to disappear before I could reappear on my own terms. I hailed a generic rideshare from the curb and directed the driver to a nondescript roadside motel on the industrial edge of Baycrest. It was the kind of place where the neon vacancy sign buzzed like a trapped insect, and the front desk clerk did not ask for ID. I checked in using my maiden name, Harper Lane, and paid cash for 2 nights. Once inside the room, which smelled faintly of stale lemon polish and dust, I locked the deadbolt and sat on the edge of the stiff mattress. My mind drifted back to the courtroom exactly 1 year ago. Our divorce had been hailed as a model of civility. There were no children to fight over, and we had split the liquid assets 50-50 with a speed that shocked our friends. At the time, I had felt relief. Now, looking back through the lens of my training, I felt foolish. Graham Vance was a man who would argue with a waiter over a 50-cent surcharge. He was pathologically possessive of his wealth. For him to sign away half his net worth without a single scream of protest was not emotional growth. It was a strategic maneuver. I opened my laptop, the screen casting a blue pallor over my face. Before I married Graham, I spent a decade as a senior compliance officer at Northbridge Compliance and Risk. I knew the playbook better than the people writing it. A quick, quiet divorce is often the most expensive cleaning fee a businessman will pay to launder his assets. You separate the legal entity of the marriage so you can bury the real capital in a place where the ex-spouse can no longer look. My 6 months in Chicago were not just about a contract job. That was the cover story. In reality, I had needed to get far enough away to stop looking at Graham with emotion and start looking at him as a subject. I clicked on a folder on my desktop named Runway. It contained a forensic timeline I had been building night after night. It was a map of his financial nervous system. There were shell companies registered in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. There were small, rhythmic wire transfers that pulsed like a heartbeat, always just under the $10,000 reporting threshold required by federal law. But those were just red flags. I scrolled to the file that had forced me to buy a plane ticket this morning. It was a PDF of a commercial loan application for $2 million, approved just 3 days ago. At the bottom of the last page was a digital signature, Harper Quinn. The curvature of the letters was precise. The slant was identical to my own hand. It was a perfect forgery. I had not been in the state when this was signed, and I certainly had not authorized a loan that used my identity as collateral. I closed my eyes and let out a long breath. I could hear Graham's voice from our last real argument, echoing in the silence of the motel room. Harper, look at you. You are good at law, but you don't understand money. You think rules create value, but they don't. They just slow down the people who actually build things. You don't understand money. I whispered the words into the empty room. That sentence was no longer an insult. It was my motivation. He thought I was just a rule follower. He forgot that the person who writes the rules knows exactly how to catch the person breaking them. My phone vibrated violently against the nightstand, startling me. I picked it up. It was another message from the same restricted number that had contacted me at the airport. If you want to keep your name clean, meet me at 11:30 tonight at the Neon Diner. Come alone. I checked the time on my laptop. It was already 10:45. I thought about the scene at the airport, playing it back in my mind frame by frame. I focused on the way Tessa had looked at my suitcase, and the way she wore that watch. Graham was too paranoid to trust a random employee with his secrets. He needed an accomplice who was financially dependent on him. Tessa was not just a mistress he was parading around to hurt me. She was a signatory. She was the gateway to the fraud. I grabbed my coat and checked my reflection in the mirror. I looked tired, but my eyes were sharp. I was not going to the diner to negotiate. I was going to find out how deep the rot went. The Neon Diner was a relic from the 50s that smelled of burnt coffee and desperation. It was the perfect place for a meeting that did not officially exist. I arrived 10 minutes early and chose the corner booth farthest from the entrance, sitting with my back to the wall. This was not paranoia. It was protocol. I slipped my hand into my blazer pocket and toggled the silent switch on my digital voice recorder. My other hand rested near the concealed panic button on my keychain, though no one looking at me would have noticed the tension in my shoulders. At exactly 11:30 at night, the door chimed. I expected Tessa to walk in looking guilty and tearful. Instead, a man in a rumpled suit shuffled toward my table. I recognized him immediately. Miles Keene. He was a mid-level risk manager at one of the regional banks Graham used. He looked like he had not slept in 3 days. He slid into the booth opposite me without ordering a drink. "I saw your name on a cash flow where it shouldn't be," Miles said, his voice low and vibrating with anxiety. He did not waste time with pleasantries. He reached into his briefcase and slid a single sheet of paper across the sticky Formica table. It was a printout of an internal compliance alert, stamped with a date from just yesterday. I looked at the header Vance Meridian Holdings. It was a corporate entity I knew Graham had formed, but down in the Know Your Customer section, the primary beneficial owner was not Graham. It was me. A cold chill that had nothing to do with the diner's air conditioning ran down my spine. We had been divorced for a year. My name should have been scrubbed from every database he touched. Instead, he was using my clean credit history and my professional reputation as a shield to bypass scrutiny for high-risk transactions. Miles tapped the paper with a trembling finger. "Today at the airport," he whispered, leaning in. He didn't faint because of old love. He fainted because he saw someone who was supposed to be far away, meaning he knew you wouldn't be there to refute it. I stared at the document. It made perfect sense. If an auditor asked questions, Graham could point to my name, a respected former compliance officer, and the auditor would back off. I was his alibi, and I didn't even know it. "Tessa Rowan," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Who is she in this file?" Miles let out a dry, humorless laugh. "She is a person signing for salary." From 3 different companies. All 3 share the same P.O. box. I nodded slowly as the pieces clicked into place. My brain shifted from shock to analysis. Tessa was not just a secretary. She was the front. Graham was running a classic invoice shuffling scheme. He was moving money through a real estate project, paying consulting fees to shell companies controlled by Tessa, and then looping the clean money back to himself. And if the structure collapsed, my name was on the foundation, and Tessa's name was on the checks. Graham would walk away claiming ignorance. "This is a 7-figure laundering operation," I said quietly. "It is bigger than that," Miles replied, wiping sweat from his upper lip. "And that is why I messaged you. If the federal agencies step in before you self-report, you will be seen as an accomplice because your name is on the header. You have 48 hours, maybe less, before the automated flagging system sends this to the regulators." I took the paper and folded it neatly, tucking it into my inner pocket. The threat was real. In the world of financial compliance, innocence does not matter. Documentation matters. If I waited, I would be a defendant. If I acted, I could be a witness. "I am not going to wait for them to come to me," I told Miles. "I am going to make him hand me the evidence himself." Miles looked at me like I was insane. "How he has locked everything down. He is scared," I said, standing up. "And scared men make mistakes when they are pushed. I need to trigger a panic response." I left enough cash on the table to cover a meal we didn't eat and walked out into the cool night air. I had the ledger. Now I just needed to force Graham to open the safe. The next morning, I sat at a window table in the artisan coffee shop directly across the street from the Vance Meridian headquarters. I was not hiding. I was wearing a sharp crimson blazer, sipping a cappuccino, and reading a newspaper like I did not have a care in the world. It was a calculated provocation. I wanted him to see me. I wanted him to know that the ghost he saw at the airport had not vanished. My phone rang at 9 o'clock sharp. The caller ID flashed Graham. I let it ring twice before answering, keeping my voice dangerously calm. "Hello, Graham." "Are you following me?" Graham's voice was tight, pitching high with a mix of leftover adrenaline and fresh panic. "I saw you. Or I thought I saw you. Why are you back? You fainted at the airport. Graham, I said, taking a slow sip of my coffee. I just stood there and saw a lot of things. I heard him inhale sharply on the other end of the line. The background noise suggested he was pacing in his office, his shoes squeaking against the hardwood floor. Look, Harper, whatever you think you saw, you are wrong, he said, his tone shifting rapidly from accusation to a greasy sort of bargaining. You don't need to make a scene. We are adults. I know the settlement was tight. I can send you some money. How much do you want $10,000? 20. Just tell me the number to make you go away. I smiled at my reflection in the window. He had just admitted he had liquid cash available to silence a witness. An innocent man does not offer $20,000 to an ex-wife just to leave town. I don't want your money. I lied, letting a tremor of feigned weakness enter my voice. I just want to know why my name is on a commercial loan application dated last week. I saw the alert. Graham. It scares me. It is a system error he snapped too quickly. It is a glitch in the legacy database. You always do this. You are always paranoid. Always imagining legal traps where there are none. I am fixing it right now. Does Tessa Rowan know it is a glitch? I asked softly. Or does she think it is standard procedure? There was a silence on the line that lasted 4 full seconds. It was heavy and suffocating. That pause told me everything. Tessa was not just a girlfriend he was trying to protect from a jealous ex-wife. She was a liability he was terrified of exposing. Don't you dare go near her, he hissed, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. You have no idea what you are messing with. He hung up. I placed the phone down on the table and immediately opened my laptop. His reaction confirmed the threat, which meant I had to lock the door before he burned the house down. I opened a pre-drafted email addressed to the fraud department of the bank Miles had warned me about. I attached a certified copy of our divorce decree, a notarized affidavit stating I had no involvement in Vance Meridian, and a formal request to freeze any account associated with my Social Security number that had been opened in the last 12 months. I hit send. That email was a time-stamped grenade. If Graham tried to blame me later, I now had proof I had tried to stop it. Next, I logged into my personal banking portal. I opened a completely new account at a credit union Graham had no connections with. I transferred my entire savings balance, every single cent, into the new secure vault. I changed my passwords, enabled two-factor authentication, and effectively built a digital fortress around my identity. Just as the transfer confirmation appeared on my screen, my phone buzzed again. It was not Graham. It was the restricted number. Tessa wants to meet you. Not to apologize. To trade lives. I stared at the screen. The cracks in Graham's ship were spreading faster than I had anticipated. I looked out the window again. A massive digital billboard on the side of a bus stop caught my eye. It was advertising the Baycrest New Horizons fundraiser, a black tie gala taking place tomorrow night. The lead sponsor listed at the bottom was the Vance Family Foundation. I looked at the glamorous photo of the event venue and felt a surge of cold determination. Graham wanted to be the star of the show. Perfect. I knew exactly where the final act needed to happen. My phone did not ring with Graham's number this time. It was a video request from Evelyn Vance, his mother, on the screen. Her face was a mask of perfectly applied foundation and icy composure. Her voice was sweet, but it carried the temperature of liquid nitrogen as she invited me to join her for tea at the Sterling Key Club. She framed it as a peace offering, but I knew better. It was a summons. I arrived at the club 20 minutes later. The Sterling Key was the kind of place where the carpet was so thick it silenced your footsteps and the air smelled of old money and beeswax. I tapped the record button on the device in my pocket before the maitre d' led me to a private drawing room at the back. Evelyn was sitting on a velvet sofa, pouring Earl Grey from a silver pot. She did not stand up to greet me. Instead, she slid a thick manila envelope across the low mahogany table. Sign the non-disclosure agreement. Harper, Evelyn said softly, her eyes devoid of warmth. Withdraw every complaint you sent to the bank this morning. Pretend none of this happened. There is $50,000 in cash inside that envelope. Consider it a late divorce settlement. I did not touch the envelope. I looked at her, keeping my face blank. Why are you so afraid of a public audit? Evelyn, I asked, if it is just a system glitch like Graham said, why pay me $50,000 because we value family honor? She replied, taking a sip of her tea. We do not air our laundry. I reached into my bag and pulled out the printout Miles had given me, the Know Your Customer form, with my name attached to a high-risk commercial loan. I placed it directly on top of her cash envelope. I watched her face closely for shock or confusion. There was none. She just stared at the paper with a flicker of annoyance, like I had spilled a drop of tea on her tablecloth. That reaction was the nail in the coffin. She was not surprised because she already knew. You knew he was using my identity, I said, the realization settling in my stomach like a stone. Evelyn sighed, setting her cup down with a sharp clink. A clean name is a resource. Harper. It must be used. A smart girl would understand that sometimes. We make sacrifices for the greater good of the estate. She viewed me not as a person, but as an identity asset. A credit score to be harvested. Before I could respond, the heavy oak doors swung open. Graham walked in. He was wearing a fresh suit, and he had plastered a fake, confident smile on his face. He walked straight to the table and placed his phone screen down on the surface. Facing me, he was recording me. It was a clumsy attempt to turn the tables, to goad me into saying something extortionate. Harper, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. You are self-destructing. You come back here, making threats, acting crazy. It is sad to watch. I looked from him to his mother. They were a united front of delusion. I am not the one who fainted at the airport. Graham, I said, keeping my voice level. You didn't faint because of stress. You passed out because you saw me. And seeing me meant your plan to use a ghost for your loans was about to collapse. You needed me. Absent. Graham's smile fractured. The veins in his neck bulged. You think you are so clever. He spat, his control slipping. You have no idea how the world works. You are just a glorified accountant. My phone buzzed in my hand. I glanced down. It was a text from the unknown number, but this time, it was an image. It was a photo of the club's front entrance taken from the parking lot. Standing behind the glass doors, looking out with red, terrified eyes, was Tessa. She looked like an animal caught in a trap, shivering in her coat. I stood up, grabbing my bag. I had what I needed. Evelyn's admission and Graham's panic were recorded. From this point forward, all communication goes through my lawyer. I said, You walk out that door, Harper, and you will regret it, Graham shouted after me, his voice cracking. I walked out of the drawing room and through the lobby. As I pushed through the revolving doors into the cool afternoon air, a hand shot out from the shadows of a pillar and grabbed my arm. It was Tessa. She was trembling so hard her teeth were almost chattering. She pulled me close, her voice a desperate, terrified whisper. You have to listen to me, she stammered, tears streaming down her face. If you don't help, they are going to push you into prison instead of me. We moved to the far side of the parking garage, where the sodium lights buzzed overhead and the shadows were deep enough to hide two women discussing a felony. Tessa Rowan was no longer the smug woman clinging to my ex-husband at the arrivals gate. She was hyperventilating. She leaned against the concrete pillar, her hands clutching her purse like a lifeline. I am not just a secretary, Tessa whispered, her voice fracturing. I hold the root access keys for the internal payment gateway. Graham made me set up the dual-factor authentication using a token linked to your old profile. She fumbled inside her bag and pressed a small, silver USB drive into my palm. Her fingers were ice cold. Everything is on there, she said, choking on the words. The contractor invoices for work that was never done. The ghost payrolls. and the emails authorizing the transfers. They all have a signature at the bottom. It says Harper Quinn, but I was the one who clicked the button. I closed my fist around the drive. It felt heavy, not with weight, but with implication. I looked at her, searching for the arrogance I had seen yesterday. It was gone. At the airport, I asked, my voice hard. Why were you holding him like that? Was it love? Tessa? Or were you just marking your territory? Tessa shook her head violently, tears spilling over. No. I was holding him because I was terrified. She stammered. He had just whispered to me. He said that if I tried to leave him, he would make sure you were the one who went to prison for the missing funds. I was hugging him because I was trapped. I stared at her. Graham had weaponized my name to keep his mistress in line. And the fainting I asked? He saw me and dropped. That is a guilty conscience. It wasn't just you, Tessa said, wiping her eyes. When he looked up and saw you standing there, he also saw two men in dark suits standing near the exit behind you. He thought they were federal agents, that you had brought them to arrest him. That is why his heart gave out. The puzzle was complete. Graham thought the raid was happening right then and there. Tell me about the money, I commanded. Where is it going? Project Sunport Key, Tessa answered. It is a development deal. The money goes into the Vance Family Foundation as a charitable donation, which is tax-deductible. Then the foundation hires a consulting firm for strategic planning on the project. The consulting firm is empty. It is just a bank account. I nodded slowly. It was a classic rinse cycle. They used the gala and the charity status to sanitize the cash, generated fake invoices to justify the movement, and then burned the paper trail. This USB is enough to start an investigation, I said, but it is not enough to prove intent. He will say you stole the data and framed us both. There is one more thing, Tessa said, her voice dropping so low I had to lean in to hear her. There is a recording, a board meeting from 3 months ago. Evelyn and Graham are on tape. They say it explicitly. Use Harper's name because she used to work in compliance. Nobody will check her work. It proves the conspiracy. Where is that file? I demanded. It is on the local server, Tessa said. In the tech room at the venue. They are setting up for the gala right now. I looked at the USB in my hand, then out at the city skyline. Tonight was the Baycrest New Horizons fundraiser. Graham was going to be on stage, smiling for the cameras, pretending to be a philanthropist. He wants to talk about the future tonight, I said, turning to walk toward my car. I think it is time we made him listen to the past. I did not return to the hotel to sleep. I went to work. I sat in the back seat of my rental car and dialed Rowan Glass. Rowan was not a family lawyer. He was a defensive weapon. He specialized in corporate whistleblowing and white-collar self-reporting. He answered on the second ring, his voice gravelly but instantly alert. Despite it being 2 a.m, I need to insulate myself from a federal investigation, I said, skipping the pleasantries. I am sending you a file. I need to be a witness. Rowan, not a defendant. For the next 3 hours, we built the package. It was not a story. It was a fortress of documents. I compiled the forensic timeline I had built, the metadata from the bank alerts, the certified copy of my divorce decree proving I had no legal ties to the company, and the preliminary statement Tessa had recorded on my phone in the parking garage. The strategy was simple, complete transparency. If I handed the government the gun before they found it, I could not be accused of pulling the trigger. You have to be the first one to knock on the door, Rowan told me over the speakerphone. If they find you, you are a co-conspirator. If you find them, you are a patriot. I set up the digital kill switch. I drafted 3 identical emails attached with the entire dossier. The first was addressed to the fraud division of the bank. The second was to the State Financial Regulatory Board. The third was to the Federal Investigative Bureau's tip line. I did not hit send immediately. I set the delay for midnight. That gave me exactly 4 hours to get the final piece of evidence from the server. I checked the online registry for the gala. My name was still listed under the founding donors section from a contribution I had made 3 years ago. Graham had forgotten to scrub the donor history. I was not crashing this party, legally. I had paid for my seat. I returned to my room to change. I bypassed the few dresses I had packed. I was not going there to play the role of the scorned ex-wife seeking attention. I reached for a tailored black suit with sharp lapels and a white silk shirt that buttoned to the collar. I pulled my hair back into a severe, tight bun. When I looked in the mirror, I did not look like a guest. I looked like an auditor arriving for a surprise inspection. My phone chimed. It was a message from Tessa. She had come through. It was a digital QR code, a vendor pass, granting access to the audio-visual technical area behind the main stage. The server is in the rack next to the amp boards. Her text read, "Please hurry. I needed one last insurance policy." I needed Graham to confirm his mindset before the fall. I opened his contact and typed a single, deliberate sentence. "We need to talk about my signature." The response came within 30 seconds. "Don't threaten me. You have nothing." I stared at the screen. He was confident. He truly believed he had sanitized the operation enough to withstand a storm. He thought he was untouchable because he held the keys to the accounts. He forgot that I wrote the manual on how those accounts were monitored. I holstered my phone and grabbed my clutch, checking for the USB drive one last time. "In the world of compliance," I whispered to the empty room. "Criminals are not afraid of the truth. They are afraid of the timestamp." I walked out the door. I was ready to punch the clock. The Sterling Pavilion was a cathedral of glass and steel, illuminated tonight by enough strobe lights to rival a runway show. The air inside was heavy with the scent of expensive champagne and the perfume of Baycrest's elite. I watched from the shadows of the entrance archway as Graham Vance made his grand entrance. He walked the red carpet not like a man under investigation, but like a conquering hero returned from war. He had Tessa on his arm. She was dressed in shimmering silver, a visual trophy meant to signal his upgrade. Graham held her hand high, parading her before the flashing cameras, trying desperately to rewrite the narrative. He wanted the world to see a man moving forward, not a man looking over his shoulder. I waited until the flashbulbs settled before I stepped into the light. I was 20 minutes late by design. When I walked onto the floor, the murmur started instantly. It rippled through the room like an electric current. I was not wearing a gala gown. I was in my severe black suit, standing out like an ink stain on a white canvas. I stood directly in the line of sight of the main camera rig. I saw heads turn. I saw the whispers jump from table to table. Graham saw me. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second before he excused himself from a group of investors and beelined toward me. He stopped 2 feet away, invading my personal space. His voice, a low hiss masked by a fake social grin. "You have some nerve showing up here," he whispered through his teeth. "Did you come here to be humiliated? Everyone here thinks you are just the bitter ex-wife who couldn't let go." I looked him dead in the eye. "No," I replied calmly. I came to see if the books matched the speech, before he could process that. I sidestepped him and melted into the crowd. I wasn't heading for the bar. I was heading for the black curtain behind the stage. I flashed the digital QR code Tessa had sent me at the security guard. He scanned it. The light turned green, and I slipped into the darkness of the technical control area. The hum of cooling fans filled the small space. I found the server rack Tessa had described. It was blinking rapidly, syncing data for the live presentation. I plugged in the access key and opened the directory. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my hands were steady. I scrolled through the active folders until I froze. There it was. A folder titled HQ Cover. It was not a random code. It stood for Harper Quinn Cover. They had not just used my name out of convenience. They had built a dedicated infrastructure to frame me months ago. This was not negligence. It was premeditated identity theft. I pulled my phone out and snapped a photo of the screen, capturing the file creation date. It was the final nail. On the other side of the curtain, the music swelled. I heard Evelyn Vance's voice booming over the speakers. And at the Vance Family Foundation, we believe in two things: total transparency and a brighter future. I stepped out from behind the curtain just as a side door to the ballroom burst open. The heavy thud of the doors echoed through the silent room. A man in a cheap, ill-fitting gray suit walked briskly down the center aisle. He was not a guest. He carried a leather portfolio and walked with the unmistakable purpose of a process server. He walked straight up the stairs to the stage, interrupting Evelyn mid-sentence. The room gasped. The silence that followed was deafening. He handed Evelyn a thick stack of documents and spoke into the microphone that was still live. Evelyn Vance, Graham Vance, and Vance Meridian Holdings. You are hereby served with a federal preservation order and a warrant for the immediate seizure of all financial records related to the Sunport Key project regarding allegations of invoice fraud and identity theft. The room exploded. It was instant pandemonium. Investors shouted questions. Cameras flashed blindly, no longer capturing a celebration but a crime scene. Graham stood frozen near the front table, his face draining of color until he looked like a wax figure. He turned his head slowly, looking past the chaos, and locked eyes with me. He looked at me as if he were seeing a ghost. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I just stood there, the auditor in the black suit. Nearby, Tessa covered her mouth with her hand and began to sob, tears ruining her perfect makeup. She knew what Graham was just realizing. The party was over. The mandatory mediation session took place the following morning in a conference room that smelled of furniture polish and fear. The air conditioning was set to a freezing temperature, but Graham was already sweating. He sat across the long mahogany table flanked by 3 lawyers who cost more per hour than most people made in a month. He was trying to project the image of a grieving victim, but his eyes were darting around the room like a trapped animal. My client is the victim of a vindictive ex-wife. Graham's lead attorney began, smoothing his tie. This is a clear case of retaliation. Ms. Quinn is using her knowledge of the company to fabricate a scandal because she cannot accept that the marriage is over. I did not blink. I did not get angry. I simply slid a binder across the table. It landed with a heavy thud. I am not here to discuss my feelings, I said, my voice flat. I am here to discuss the timeline. This binder contains the receipt of my self-report package sent to the Federal Fraud Division and the state regulators. The timestamp is 4 hours prior to the seizure warrant served at your gala. I did not fabricate a scandal. Graham, I reported a crime before you could hide it. Graham slammed his hand on the table, his composure cracking. She is lying, he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. It was Tessa. Tessa did this on her own. She was jealous of you, Harper. She stole the access codes and she conspired with you. You two set this up to frame me. I stayed silent, letting him talk. Silence is a rope, and Graham was busy tying a noose. Tessa accessed the mainframe. Graham continued, his voice rising in pitch. She used the dual-layer admin token to bypass the firewall and plant those files. I never authorized any of it. My lawyer, Rowan Glass, looked up from his notepad. He smiled, a sharp, predatory expression. Mr. Vance, Rowan said softly, you just described the dual-layer admin token protocol. That is a proprietary security measure used only by executive officers within your internal network. An outsider, or even a standard secretary like Ms. Rowan, would not know that specific bypassing terminology unless she was instructed by a system administrator. You just admitted you know exactly how the fraud was technically executed. The room went dead silent. Graham's mouth hung open. He realized too late that he had gotten too specific. The door to the conference room opened. Tessa Rowan walked in, followed by a court-appointed public defender. She looked exhausted, her eyes rimmed with red, but she held her head up. She did not look at Graham. She looked at the stenographer. I am submitting a sworn affidavit, Tessa announced, her voice trembling but audible. I was coerced. I have emails from Graham Vance and Evelyn Vance instructing me to use the token. They threatened to fire me and ruin my credit if I did not comply. She placed a digital recorder on the table and pressed play. The audio was grainy, but the voices were unmistakable. It was a recording of a board meeting. "We need a clean name for the loan application," Graham's voice said on the tape. "Use Harper's name. She used to work in compliance. If her name is on the header, the auditors will assume it is legitimate. It makes everything look clean. Do it." Evelyn's voice added, "She is too proud to check. She will never know." I looked at Evelyn. The poise she had maintained for decades shattered. She stood up, her face twisted into a mask of pure venom. "You ungrateful little—" she screamed, lunging toward the table. "I will sue you to death. I will spend every cent of this estate to bury you in litigation until you are living in a gutter." The stenographer typed furiously. Rowan nodded at me. Evelyn had just put a threat of witness intimidation on the official record. Graham looked at his mother, then at the recorder, and finally at me. He slumped in his chair. He signaled for his lawyers to stop talking. "Stop," Graham whispered. "Just stop." He leaned forward, his voice desperate and low. "Harper, look, we can end this right now. I will give you the lake house. I will give you $2 million in cash. I will pay your legal fees. All you have to do is sign a non-disclosure agreement and withdraw your witness statement. Just walk away, please. I can't go to prison." I stood up, smoothing the front of my blazer. "I don't want your house, Graham, and I certainly don't want your dirty money," I said. "You used my name to commit a felony. You made me an accessory. My goal isn't to get rich. My goal is to scrub my name off your ledger." I turned to leave. As I reached the door, my phone buzzed with an official notification. It was a subpoena for an emergency evidentiary hearing the next morning. "We will see you in court," I said without looking back. I walked out of the room, but I knew it wasn't over. Graham was cornered, and a cornered narcissist always has one final, reckless move left to play. The hearing room was silent except for the hum of the ventilation system and the scratching of the stenographer's machine. Graham stood before the judge, gripping the podium with white knuckles. He was trying to maintain the facade of the misunderstood genius, the captain of industry besieged by a vindictive woman. "Your Honor, this is absurd," Graham said, his voice smooth but lacking its usual weight. "My ex-wife does not understand complex financial structuring. She is lashing out because of personal grievances. She is jealous, and she is using the legal system to exact revenge for a failed marriage." I sat at the plaintiff's table and did not say a word. I simply signaled Rowan Glass. My lawyer stood up and placed a single, heavy binder on the judge's bench. "We are not here to debate feelings," Rowan said sharply. "We are here to debate forensics. Exhibit A contains the certified divorce decree proving my client had no legal access to Vance Meridian accounts for 12 months. Exhibit B is the time-stamped log of her self-report to federal agencies, filed 4 hours before the seizure warrant was executed. And Exhibit C is the server log which identifies the IP address that created the forged digital signature." The judge flipped through the pages, her expression hardening. She looked down at Graham over her spectacles. "Mr. Vance, this log shows the signature was generated from a device registered to your personal office." The judge stated, "And then there is the matter of a folder found on your server labeled HQA cover." Can you explain that?" Graham hesitated. He licked his lips, his eyes darting to his expensive legal team. "That stands for headquarters coverage." Graham stammered. "It is a standard file for insurance documents." That was the lie we had been waiting for. Rowan stood up immediately. "Your Honor, we would like to submit a rebuttal witness statement," Rowan said. "Specifically, an audio recording from the Board of Directors meeting dated 3 months ago." The judge nodded. Rowan pressed a button on the console. Graham's voice filled the courtroom, clear and damning. "Use Harper's name. She used to work in compliance. If her name is on the header, The auditors will assume it is legitimate. It makes everything look clean. The silence that followed was absolute. Graham seemed to shrink inside his suit. The air left the room. But the state prosecutor was not done. He stood up from the back of the room, holding a fresh sheet of paper. "Your Honor, the state would like to add an additional evidence exhibit," the prosecutor announced. At 1 minute past midnight, after the gala, the defendant attempted to remotely wipe the server. He believed he was successful. However, he failed to account for the automated cloud backup that runs at midnight sharp. We have the deletion logs. This is clear obstruction of justice and destruction of evidence. The judge slammed her gavel down. The sound cracked like a gunshot. The court finds that all debts and liabilities attached to the identity of Harper Quinn regarding the Sunport Key project are fraudulent. She ruled, "Ms. Quinn is hereby granted full immunity under the Whistleblower Protection Act. Mr. Vance, you are remanded into custody pending a criminal trial for wire fraud, identity theft, and obstruction." Graham turned to look at me. His face was gray. He took a step toward my table, ignoring the bailiffs moving toward him. "Harper," he whispered, his voice cracking. "We can make a deal. I can fix this." I looked him in the eyes, my expression stone cold. "You fainted at the airport because you saw me," I said clearly. "You fainted because in that split second, you realized I was the only person on earth who knew how to close the ledger." The back doors of the courtroom burst open. 2 federal marshals marched in. They walked past the gallery and handcuffed Graham. Another pair of officers approached the front row where Evelyn Vance was sitting. "Evelyn Vance," the officer said loudly, "we have a warrant for your arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and witness intimidation." I watched as they were led away. I did not smile. I did not cheer. I simply picked up my briefcase and walked out into the hallway. The sun was streaming through the high windows. I pulled out my phone and sent one final text message to my bank. "Close all identity verification links permanently. The audit is complete." I looked up, took a deep breath of the fresh air, and for the first time in a year, I felt completely clean. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from. I would love to hear your thoughts and connect with you. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel Lily Revenge Stories, like the video, and hit the hype button so more people can hear this story.